Welcome to Mission Imperfect, the podcast about finding your own path, your own way, and embracing the imperfection of the journey.
We're your hosts, life coaches, former HR professionals, and mums, Kirsty and Kathryn.
We love to discuss the topics that come up time and time again for our coaching clients and which affect us all, from things like acceptance and boundaries to values and well-being and everything in between.
Each episode ends with a question for you and us to reflect on. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to grab a cuppa and a biscuit and join us in getting lost in finding ourselves. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mission Imperfect. But we are breaking with our own tradition this week. We have a 2-word episode title. Radical, I know, you might need a little sit down. This week it is Life Chapters. And Kathryn, tell us more about what you mean by life chapters.
Oh, I'm happy to. I didn't realise. Have we only had 1-word titles so far?
I think so. Well, I'm going to have to go and double check that now. But I think we've mainly used 1 word.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think we're going to break it again in the next one. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about life chapters. It's a concept I only came across since starting coaching. And it's something I really wish I'd understood or appreciated before. So I actually really like the analogy that life can be, hopefully, and sometimes a bit unfortunately, a bit like a good book, because we have interesting characters that feature. They arrive and they depart, the good and the bad ones. There are sometimes plot twists. There are sometimes unexpected moments. There are the good moments, the things that we celebrate, have achievements and feel triumphant. There's the sad or the frustrating moments as well. And it's not all smooth sailing. So I think they're your kind of similarities between life and I think the ingredients of what make quite a good book. Otherwise it's really boring and dull, isn't it? And I think if we all reflect on our lives to date, I think you can probably think of some examples of most of those things happening, the good, the bad, the ugly, the characters, the plot twists, if not all of them. I mean, do you agree, Kirsty? Does that kind of sound?
Absolutely, yeah. So many of them going through my head right now. Didn't see that one coming.
Yeah. And it's just, I think the reason I said I wish I had this before is because I think we all recognize, life doesn't flow completely smoothly. By the time we've reached, into our 40s or beyond, whatever it might be, I think we've kind of grasped that not everything has been a completely smooth and seamless transition from one expected life event to the next. I think when we're children, we kind of had this idea of, well, you go to school, you grow up, you have a job, you buy a house, you do all these things, and you don't think much further than that. But it kind of feels a bit like one long script, like almost like the whole book, rather than this idea of chapters. And I think when you're older, you have this appreciation of things don't always go according to plan. You might think you're going to be a vet, but then you realize you hate the sight of blood, so that's a bad idea, and you have to retrain in something else.
Science, yeah.
Yeah, and then and things also just don't go as expected, even if you think it's what's going to happen or what you're going to be or what you're going to do or who you're going to meet, who you're going to marry, all those things. And we can't control everything around us. And the bit that I really wanted to latch onto is this idea of you adjust and you write the chapters as you go. It's not about knowing everything in advance. You kind of get to the end of one chapter and then consider what's going to happen in the next one. And no matter what's been happening so far, you can at least choose to influence, even if you can't control, you can at least have a go at the direction you're going to take next, and what's happening around you. And, if you want a bit of a plot twist, a career change is a good example of one of these, then why not? And, new characters might feature in your life. And that, let's see, are they going to stay around? Are they a brief presence? There's all these things that are going to unfold that you don't get to until you're in that next chapter, if I'm making sense.
It's making a lot of sense, yeah. That idea when we're children that it's kind of all mapped out. There's a way that things should go,
Mm.
And as you get older and the shoulds don't happen, and you get those plot twists, unexpected moments, and more of the bad than the good, it can really throw you. Of course, it can make you feel like you're failing, because you were supposed to have this story. This was supposed to be the story, and now actually your story is unfolding very differently. And it's kind of, what did I do wrong? I'm failing. Whereas if you think of it as something that you are writing each chapter as you go, you're living of your life as writing each chapter as you go. That's very different to, there is the story of my life laid out before me in advance.
Yeah, I think that could be quite scary, can't it? And I think when you're younger, you have, I don't know, did you ever do something in school where they'd say, like, when you were perhaps quite young, and they'd be like, where will you be when you're an adult? And you think, well, as an adult, I'll be about 20. I didn't really know anything. I was 20, let's be honest. And then you think, oh, perhaps I'll be married at 24, and perhaps and it's just like, it's all a bit ludicrous, really, isn't it, when we think about it? Because who's to say that that's the appropriate time for these things to happen? I'm not saying you get wed to these things when you're younger, but I do believe there is a certain element of, this might be a kind of trajectory for me and my life, and how it should pan out, or will pan out, or I expect it to pan out. And then when you're in it, you have to adjust and change and tweak as you go. But I actually think that's quite reassuring, because, going back to that vet's example, maybe that just wasn't meant to be for you, but maybe there's something else that you didn't know. That's the other thing. When I was younger, I didn't know of half of the careers out there. When we've both spoken quite openly about this, we had no idea about coaching, did we, until either of us had previous careers in HR. I just think you don't know of all the options that are available to you, but it's quite another thing to realize you can choose to take those options available to you. You have to obviously give yourself permission to do that. It's like, again, and then write the next chapter. I'll write it differently to the one that I've just had.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, that's the cool part, isn't it? That there are these choices and opportunities out there that exist outside of your script, the story you are telling yourself in advance, and you can rewrite to accommodate that. That's powerful. And because I think sometimes in writing those stories when we're younger, there's the assumption, we all have the fairy tales read to us when we're little, and there's always that, and they all lived happily ever after ending, isn't there? And there's kind of assumption that's how a story should go, but that's rarely happens for people, because there isn't an ending in the middle of your story. Your story keeps going on, so happily ever after isn't an ending. It's just the beginning of the next chapter, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
the chapter that
exactly
never gets told. Cinderella the divorce years, we don't hear about that bit of a fairy tale, do we?
I think you should write that, Kirsty. Cinderella the divorce years, and just she grew old disgracefully.
Prince Charming was actually a narcissistic git. Yeah. Okay, might do that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Actually, if you look at what the fairy tales tell us, and I used to love. So we're going off on a bit of a tangent here, but have you seen the Disney film of Sleeping Beauty? Did you ever watch that when you were a child?
No. Deprived childhood. I haven't seen it, no.
No, to be honest, I much preferred Robin Hood, if I'm being honest, the one with the foxes. But anyway, that's another digression. Going back to Sleeping Beauty, it was just, it was a film. Me and my sister, we watched it, we loved it. But actually, it was sometime later I realised, it's a bit terrible, really. She's 16, and they're already planning her marriage when she's about 16. Just going to say that again. And then, in the second half of the film, after she wakes up, she actually doesn't speak. And then she's just married off, and it's supposed to be there, like you said, happily ever after. And you think, what a load of gubbins that is. I would love to see the next chapter where she's like, perhaps I do have a voice and an opinion. And I'm sure the prince was lovely and everything. He happened to be good looking, and that's quite helpful and all the rest of it. But yeah, maybe Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, the divorce years, and whatever happens next.
I mean, Cinderella, the fact that the bloke who's fallen in love with you can't recognise you from your face. He has to make sure a certain shoe fits. That's a little bit of a red flag, I would have thought. But, each to their own.
Yeah. Anyway, let's go back to the perhaps more realistic view of our lives as opposed to the fairy tales. But I think sometimes we have these chapters that are governed by the significant or expected life events. So sometimes they're planned and anticipated. So, for example, when you're younger, you have the school years chapter, or chapters, probably primary and secondary. You know, they are kind of governed for you and expected. But then later on, we have the ones that they're going to happen at different times, but there's still those big life events like getting married, moving home, those kinds of things. Or sadly, sometimes they're unexpected, you know, perhaps things like redundancy. But in addition to this, it's not to say that all chapters are governed by events, although I do think they're kind of like helpful markers to kind of note what kind of period you're in your life, I suppose. But we have what I love to give things names. I just make things up, but they make perfect sense to me. I call them interludes or transition windows. And I came up with this in a session with a client, and she was like, yes, I totally get that, because she felt like it's in that sort of in-between moments, you know, when you realize perhaps one chapter is coming to an end. Maybe the dust is settling from one of those big life events, and we're considering what's going to come next. You know, it's like that moment of shift, like before it happens, you're thinking about, I want something to be a little bit different, maybe contemplating a move or even smaller bit. And it's those slightly messier chapters, well, mini chapters, I should call them, probably in the middle, that are happening. And the reason I like this analogy of chapters with the interludes and whatever, I think it helps to explain why everything's not totally smooth sailing. B, I think it allows for that element of choice. But again, just like that book that we were talking about, the good novel at the start, there's the main protagonist, which is ourselves. There's other important characters, you know, your heroes and villains. There's the cliffhangers, the good, the bad, the downright what on earth is going on, all of those kind of things. And I think it's for me, I've just found it quite a nice way to reflect on what's going on for me, because not all chapters are going to be great. Let's be completely honest. There are the difficult chapters, but I also like to think it doesn't mean it's going to stretch on into, you know, infinity. There will be an end to this chapter and the start of another one, and I get a say in that. And I think it gives some of the power back to you, rather than you being sort of subject to what's happening.
Yeah, those transition windows. I mean, I suspect that in most books, certainly in sort of the more action-packed and thriller ones, that they would be the bits that you skimmed over and didn't really read properly, the boring bits maybe. But those are the bits where things settle and where you start to have an opportunity to choose your response and consider your way forward and what you want, aren't they? So
Yes.
I think when we're trying to create a narrative of our lives with hindsight, it tends to be all based around bouncing from those big life events, you know, the main chapter headings. And we sort of miss out on that bit, isn't it? Somehow I ended up from here to here. And I've noticed this somebody asked me recently how it was I ended up as a coach. And I've hit on this issue so many times in trying to describe it that I find it very hard to come up with a coherent narrative. It's not a straight line. And I think this explains it quite nicely. There's those big life events, you know, the big stuff that was going on, but it's the bits in the middle where things are settling and changing and you're getting to grips with what's going on around you. And, well, you use the word transition. Those transitions in your own mindset, in your own understanding of who you are and what you want are really starting to happen and to bed in. And that leads to the next thing. And it's not always an obvious progression, is it, when you look back? But those bits that might not make for the most exciting part of the novel for the reader are probably really important.
Yeah, exactly. Because life isn't all just big event to big event. There's all the boring and the messy stuff in between, but they are important too. And they do ultimately shape those bigger events. They're the things that we remember, aren't they? Let's be honest. We think about our significant life events, but they are peppered in amongst the more mundane parts and elements of those chapters as well. But yeah, I just like this idea of the lack of permanence of a current chapter. And if you don't like parts of it, this idea that you can do something about it. And sometimes your chapter will change because of things beyond your control as well. But equally, that also then gives you a chance to reevaluate, consider what it is that you want.
Response,
yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes you can kind of foresee a chapter coming to an end and a new one emerging. And then sometimes, it might be unexpectedly and abruptly after a plot twist. But I like this idea of being able to too concerned always about the sort of permanence or longevity of one stage of your life. And I find that a lot more comforting. So I recognize the chapter I'm in at the moment, but I also, and there's a good and the bad about it, as there is in most chapters, but I like to think this is where we are now. This is what works for us in our situation right now. And, my daughter's going through school, and of course, well, actually she's just entered, this is a really good example. She's just entered a really significant new chapter for us, which is secondary school. So, so she doesn't need me so much around for the school run and that kind of thing. So it's a new, what does this potentially give me now? What can small, I recognize that, but this is me building in this chapter, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, the way things happen there. I mean, your daughter going to secondary school is not an unexpected event, but nor is it sort of one that's within your control as such. That's a strange sort of halfway house, isn't it? It's not fully within your control, and yet it's not unexpected. And that's interesting, and how we adapt to that and the differences it makes, because it does feel like a big change at the time. And that the different styles of books we read, where some books are I'm a Jane Austen fan, and an awful lot of what is happening in Jane Austen would be considered small. It's little events, little interactions, conversations, not murders and things being blown up, which is the other type of book I like as well. I love a trashy thriller. And there's a place for all of it in writing your own story. And if you're in a place in your life where it feels really good, that recognition that it is a phase is a real encouragement to be in the moment and savor it, isn't it? And if you're not in such a good place, the knowledge that it is a temporary thing is helpful in helping, finding a way forward through that and dealing with it. And I think something else around there is the idea of, you've used the word protagonist a few times. I tend to think of the idea that, a book has a hero or heroine, but we'll stick with the hero and assume that gender is irrelevant. But the hero is rarely perfect. The heroes make mistakes, and they have bad times, and they do things they regret and that have unfortunate consequences. But they usually keep going, and that's what makes the book interesting, isn't it? If you even the basic fairy tale, you get that plot twist. It all starts out so promising, everything's lovely, then something awful happens, and you think, oh my God, how are they going to come back from this? But somehow they do. But if you didn't have that bit, that awful bit, would you read the book?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because you get invested in their outcome, don't you? I'm reading Kate Atkinson at the moment. I'm a big fan of hers. I've really enjoyed a few. This one's a bit different. It's like 1920s, and there isn't really one main protagonist. It kind of flits through different perspectives. But I'm equally invested in quite a few different characters. But I love that they're so far from perfect. It's not true, but I still really like them. I like how sort of human they are. Yeah. But I guess this is a real difference, I guess, now between the book and our lives, because obviously now I'm reading this book and I'm loving it, but I have no idea where she's taking it. And she might do something to one of the characters I really like, and I'll be like, no, why did you kill this character, or whatever it might be. But of course, with ours, we are author and in it, so we do get a say over direction in the end. Yes, there'll be some things that we don't.
Not killing characters. We don't go that far. We don't kill characters.
Yes, no. No,
just think.
no, just to make that definitely clear.
Not advisable, not encouraging.
No. But yes, there'll be things that we can't control, and we might be like, oh, for God's sake, why this, why that, and so on. But also, the end isn't written yet. We actually will get a say over how that will end, and there isn't a foregone conclusion either, which I think is great. Obviously, the book we're heading towards reading it and wondering where it's going to go. It might not be what we predict, but it's not in our control, is it? We're hoping they're going to do it justice, and I'm sure, 99 times out of 100. Have you ever read a book and then been so disappointed at the end of how they've concluded it?
I read for a book club The Bee Sting by Paul Murray recently. As I finished reading it, there was a moment of utter incomprehension followed by, I have to confess, a great deal of swearing. I was actually flipping through the going through the acknowledgement, seeing if it had hidden an actual conclusive ending somewhere else in the book, further on. And was, what? You cannot leave it like that.
I wonder if they did that on purpose.
Well, I think the bastard did, yes. And frankly, not my favourite person.
I'm starting to think I shouldn't have brought this up. You're not really indignant about it. But yeah, no, it's interesting because that just goes to show you wanted a different ending to that book, and yet and it was not within your control to influence how that was going to pan out. So luckily it's different in life.
It wasn't so much I wanted different. I wanted some sense of conclusion, because he left you completely up in the air. You don't know what happened to any of the main characters. And maybe that is liberating in that you get to choose what happened to them. But I just find it frustrating, frankly. But when you're writing your own story, I think something we get to do is we get to make the choices to whether we are going to be the hero or the villain as the story progresses. Not the villain, the victim. Another word beginning with V. When you're... Maybe this is just me, but I find it very easy to slip into that kind of victim mindset that these things are happening to me, that this chapter is out of control and all the bad stuff's happening and it's not fair. Woe is me. And I'm going to sit around and wait for Prince Charming to turn up with or without glass slipper. Maybe he'll recognise me by some means other than my feet. I don't know. But, somebody needs to come and rescue me. What the hell's going on here? And that's where the book gets a bit boring, isn't it? Because people who just sit around waiting for something to happen, it's not very interesting. Whereas if you choose to write yourself as the hero, that you are going to take responsibility and move forward, that really changes the nature of the story. Yeah.
And that's why I think there's nothing wrong with having long-term plans. If you do have a real idea of how you want things to pan out, then that's great. But I think there's such value in these shorter term ones, because you can decide, I want to bring this to a close sooner. It's not what I want. I'm going to start something else. So the biggest thing I can talk about in relation to this is this idea of career for life, that kind of mentality that it doesn't apply so much anymore. I think you and I have probably both come through our careers in a time when it's kind of shifted. I mean, so my parents, for example, very much were sort of career for life teachers. So I kind of had this understanding when I was younger that I would be a something and kind of like forever, until I retired. But what about when you don't enjoy it? What about if it's just not right anymore? What if it's just, it worked for you in your 20s, it doesn't work for you in your 40s because of other life events that have happened? You've moved or you've had children or whatever it might be. And that brings us back to this idea of, shoulds, which we've spoken about before. Why should you stay in that career for life? And says who? Because it may not be right anymore. And it was because of those questions I thought, I want a new chapter for me. This is going back a few years where I thought, I've loved my HR chapter, but it's time to draw this one to a close. I went whole hog. We moved and did everything else as well at the same time. But it was, it took me till 39 to realize that I was allowed to do that. I kind of wish I'd known it a bit before. I don't, no regrets. It was fine for it to be when it was, but it's just, I don't think I had such a grasp on that concept until 39. So I'm hoping that people listening will think I actually like this idea of life chapters, and I could and actually, no matter what age you are, there's no sort of too late for another chapter, because it's only too late when it's all over. Then we can't do anything about it. But
yeah, there's always time, isn't there? Age is just a number; it's not a definition. And sometimes you have to have experience. You have to learn things. You have to literally change your mind in order to be able to find the new direction that feels right, in order to be able to let go of what you thought you wanted and recognize that it's not working for you. And we can write different chapters. We can have the plot twist. Everyone has a plot twist.
Near the end, who says you can't? When that needs to be, you can have that at any stage. So I found a couple of great quotes, I think, about this. It was interesting when we're looking for our quotes. Sometimes some are really easy to find, aren't they? But this was a bit of I thought, who else uses this term, life chapters? But I found a couple which I think are great. So I particularly like this one. This is Dan Millman. He said, "You don't just have a story, you're a story in the making, and you never know what the next chapter is going to be. That's what makes it exciting." So I love this idea of that we are the story. That goes back to this idea of it's unfolding as we go, rather than it being written for us. The bit where I guess I disagree. He says you never know what the next chapter is going to be. I kind of agree. We don't know exactly how things are going to unfold, but at least we can try to take some charge and influence over the direction it's generally going to head in, if we're willing to make some choices and reassess what it is that we want.
Yeah, you get to move in the direction you want to go in. Whether you'll end up at the point you expect to end up or how you'll get there are different questions entirely. But you've always got that choice, that power, haven't you, to at least take a step in the direction you want to go in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I spotted quite a long-winded one, but I think it kind of makes a nice point. So this is from Yossi Ginsberg. And it says, despite the natural belittling of oneself, the doubts, the insecurities, we have to wake up to the realization that we all write our own autobiography. We are the authors of our life story. Realizing that, write a good story with your life and make sure to write yourself as the protagonist. Be the hero of your journey.
Oh, I love that. We could have just read that, really, couldn't we? And that would be nice.
Isn't that an episode where we think, we should have just read the quote and be done in 2 minutes?
Yeah. So there you go. That's all you need to know.
Where's the fun in that?
No, exactly. So let's finish with our question.
Yes.
And to be honest, it's probably not a surprising one. And it's just to get people to start thinking about their current life chapter. And this can be regardless of where you're up to in your life, just thinking about how does it look and what would you like the next chapter or a future chapter to contain? Is it more of what you have now? Is it building on what you have now? Or is it different some way? And then I suppose the cheeky follow on to that is, and then what might you start to do about that now you've thought about it? I suppose for me, I started this chapter. I like to think, I think I'm mid-chapter at the moment. I've moved to Devon chapter. We've settled in now. It's been longer than I thought that we've been here. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. In the time has kind of flown away, and we've been here for a couple of years now. And I think this has been the sort of bedding in, and it feels like it's the right place to be at the moment. So for me, it's, I guess, the settling of this chapter. I'm trying to build on it. So I would like to still think my future still contains coaching, but it might be paired with something outside of that, something else for me that I enjoy. I've done a little bit of that already. I'm not at the moment, but I think I might introduce that again. Doing a little bit to our home, because I think we've kind of inherited it rather than perhaps put our real stamp on it. And this idea of just having things to look forward to. I've realised how much I enjoy having that, and I love going away. So we were talking about holidays, weren't we, Kirsty, before we came onto the episode? And I love having. So yes, we should actually start recording, shouldn't we? But yeah, I like. So I think for me, I'm mid-chapter. I don't think I'm on a interlude or transition at the moment, but I recognise there are things that I want to build on for this chapter to make it better than it is. How about you, Kirsty?
Oh, I like that. I think inevitably, in a somewhat similar sort of place in the book, yeah, I want the next chapter to still involve coaching, still involve being able to talk about and learn about mindset and all that makes us tick. If I had to sum it up in a single word, I think growth is what I would like. More growth. I want to keep growing what I've got. What I'm doing in terms of getting to know myself, what I'm doing in terms of coaching. And I think something I've been very aware of lately is that although I've made a lot of progress, I keep getting caught up in a phrase that I think is quite well known in sort of coaching and spiritual self-help circles, attachment to outcome, where it's like this idea, it's very much like the idea we talked about at the start, that you have in mind as a child that your story is laid out and it's going somewhere and that's where you should be going and where you're going to end up. And then you get frustrated, and if that doesn't seem to be happening and you don't enjoy yourself so much where you are because you're thinking you should be somewhere else. And I've got so much better at not doing that, but I still slide into it. Something that's what's growth about, isn't it? Growth is about recognizing when you're doing it, finding ways to avoid doing it so much. And I would like to find more ways of not doing that, more wanting to take the steps in the direction I want to go in. I want to do that, but accepting that the journey will be what it is, and what it is what it's meant to be.
Well, that sounds like a brilliant note on which to end today's episode. I know, I think you've surprised yourself. Words of wisdom.
Yeah,
love
maybe
that.
A biscuit.
So I hope you have enjoyed today's episode all about life chapters. Please do give that question a bit of thought about what you would like for your own next life chapter. And we will see you all soon for another episode.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Mission Imperfect.
Please visit the show notes for details on how to contact us and for any resources we may have on the topic discussed.
Until next time, keep being imperfectly you. No one does it better.